I'll never forget the sound of that gate creaking shut behind us. It was one of those sweltering June afternoons, the kind where the air feels heavy enough to press down on your shoulders. My kids had been buzzing all morning, swimsuits already on under their clothes, goggles dangling around their necks. But the excitement drained from their faces the second the security guard handed me a folded piece of paper. A suspension notice. Effective immediately, our entire family was banned from the community pool. Not for a week, not for a month, for the entire summer. I felt Chloe tug at my hand, her little voice cracking as she whispered, "Dad, what did we do wrong?" Ethan, 12 years old and usually the first to speak up, just stared, frozen. And Ryan, my youngest, clutched his floaty so tight it squeaked. Behind us, I heard laughter, sharp, smug, unmistakable. I turned just in time to see Victoria Hale, the HOA president, strutting through the gates with her little circle of friends. Arms full of floaties, coolers, and speakers. The very things she had banned every other kid from bringing. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about safety. This was about control, humiliation, and Victoria was enjoying every second of it. My name's Daniel Carter, and I'll tell you one thing, when someone comes after my family, I don't just roll over. 20 years in construction taught me something simple. When someone slams the door in your face, you don't beg them to open it. You build your own. But before I explain what I built, before I tell you how Victoria's little power trip turned this neighborhood upside down, let me take you back. Because it didn't start with a suspension notice. It started with hope. When my wife Laura and I first moved into Maplewood Heights, it felt like paradise in a box. Streets so perfectly trimmed it looked like they'd been ironed. Sprinklers misting the sidewalks in the mornings, catching the sunlight like glass. And right in the middle of it all stood the prize, an Olympic-sized community pool. That was the selling point for me. Not the granite countertops, not the vaulted ceilings. It was the thought of my kids growing up with summers spent in the water, laughter echoing against the fence line. I justified the $425 HOA fees every month because of that pool. "It'll be worth it," I told Laura. "Every cannonball, every game of Marco Polo, this will be their childhood." And at first it really was perfect. I'd come home after long days on the job site, boots caked with dust, shirt stuck to me with sweat. The first thing I'd hear when I opened the door was 3 voices in unison. "Dad, can we go to the pool?" Laura would already be packing a tote, towels, sunscreen, crackers in a Ziploc bag. We'd walk down as a family, and for a couple of hours every evening the world felt simple again. I can still hear it now, the echoes of kids splashing, parents laughing under umbrellas, the sharp whistle of Coach Harold, the HOA president back then, calling for the swim team. Ethan joined the team within a week, swimming like he'd been born with gills. Chloe and Ryan took lessons, and me? I met neighbors I didn't even realize lived 2 doors down. For the first time in years I thought, this isn't just a subdivision, this is home. Harold was the kind of man who made it all possible. Retired teacher, whistle around his neck, but more for show than anything. He'd chuckle whenever the kids got too loud. "That's what summer sounds like," he'd say. He understood that the pool wasn't just chlorinated water, it was the heartbeat of Maplewood Heights. But all good things eventually change. When Harold and his wife announced they were moving to Arizona, I felt this unease in my gut. I didn't pay much attention to the special election. I figured, what's the worst that could happen? Someone else would step in, keep things running smoothly. Then Victoria Hale showed up. She came in polished and sharp, power suits, silver bob, binder under her arm thicker than a dictionary. She didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't seem like someone who'd ever splashed in a pool just for fun. At her very first meeting, she slapped that binder on the table and declared, "This community has been running without proper structure. That changes now." I should have heard the warning bells right then. The rules came down like a thunderstorm. Adult swim hours in the middle of the day, right when kids had energy to burn. Toys banned unless approved. New signs demanding quiet voices only. And the kicker, every child under 16 had to pass a swimming test, administered not by a lifeguard but by Victoria herself. At first I tried to shrug it off. Rules were rules, but Memorial Day weekend changed that. I remember the morning clear as glass. Ethan had wrapped his towel around his shoulders like a cape. Chloe skipped down the sidewalk. Ryan carried his floaty twice his size. We got to the gate, swiped our cards, stepped inside. And within minutes the whistle blew. Chloe had jumped in, a splash of joy in the air. The lifeguard, just a teenager, cheeks red with embarrassment, pointed to a new sign. No splashing allowed. I stared at him, thinking he was joking. But no, his eyes said he was as trapped as the rest of us. That was the first crack in paradise. By the next week, Ethan was fined for swimming 5 minutes past adult hours. $50 for a 12-year-old chasing a dream. Then Chloe was scolded for laughing too loudly. A clipboard appeared in our mailbox with another warning. And by mid-June, dinner at our table was silent. My kids' shoulders slumped. Chloe whispered, "Why doesn't Mrs. Hale like us? We didn't do anything wrong." I didn't have an answer. And that silence, heavier than any concrete I've ever poured, was the beginning of the storm. "You don't belong here." That's what it felt like Victoria Hale was saying every time she opened her mouth, even if the words never left her lips. By mid-June, the community pool, once the heart of Maplewood Heights, had become something closer to a courtroom. Every laugh was judged, every splash was evidence, and every child guilty until proven innocent. I tried to hold it together for the kids. When Chloe came home in tears because she'd been scolded for giggling with Ryan, I knelt down, wiped her cheeks, and told her it wasn't her fault. When Ethan's practice got cut short because his stopwatch ticked 5 minutes into adult swim, I clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You swam great today." But deep down, the fire was building. Laura noticed it first. She caught me packing in the kitchen one night. Violation notices spread across the counter like a losing hand of cards. "Daniel," she said softly, "this isn't healthy. You can't let her get under your skin like this." But she didn't see Ethan stabbing at his dinner in silence. She didn't hear Chloe whispering in bed, asking why Mrs. Hale hated kids. She didn't see Ryan bury his floaty in the closet because we're not allowed to use it anyway. The truth was, Victoria wasn't enforcing rules. She was enjoying the control. And every day she tightened her grip, another piece of our community broke off. So I decided to fight back. It started with a clipboard and a pen. I went door to door, sweat soaking through my shirt in the summer heat, knocking on neighbors' doors like a salesman, not selling vacuums or magazine subscriptions, selling fairness. David Morales, a father of 2, met me on his porch. His daughter peeked from behind his leg, clutching a bright pink pool noodle. "They told her she can't use it," he said, shaking his head. "She came home crying, asking if she'd broken the rules. A noodle, Daniel, a plastic noodle." Grace Lee, who lived 3 streets over, told me she'd tried to speak up at a board meeting. Tried to point out that Victoria's new restrictions went against the original HOA covenants. But Victoria had cut her mic mid-sentence. Grace's eyes burned as she told me, "I've never felt so dismissed in my own neighborhood." I wasn't alone. Family after family told the same story. Kids humiliated, parents fined. A neighborhood divided into loyalists and troublemakers. By the end of the week, I had 15 signatures. 15 families willing to stand up and say, "Enough." We brought the petition to the next HOA meeting. The air in that community center was heavy with tension, like a storm waiting to break. On one side sat weary parents clutching their kids' hands. On the other, Victoria's loyalists, mostly retirees, arms folded, eyes sharp, cheering her every word. When my turn came, I walked to the front with my clipboard. My boots scuffed against the tile. I laid the petition down on the table and said, steady but firm, "We all pay the same dues. These rules punish families with children, and that's not what this community was built on." I looked around the room, caught the hopeful eyes of parents, the wide stares of kids too young to understand politics but old enough to feel unfairness. "The pool is supposed to be for everyone," I said. Victoria didn't even blink. She flipped through the signatures, snapped the folder shut, and said curtly, "The regulations were properly approved by the board. If your children cannot behave appropriately in a shared space, perhaps you should consider installing a private pool." The room rippled with laughter from her supporters. My fists clenched under the table, not because of her words, but because Chloe had heard them too. She turned her face into Laura's side, embarrassed. The motion was dismissed. The petition ignored, the vote 4-3 in Victoria's favor. That was the night I stopped believing in petitions. The real breaking point came on a Saturday in late June. The kind of day when the air hums with cicadas and the pavement burns through thin flip-flops. We'd barely settled into our chairs when Victoria herself stormed over, security guard in tow. She thrust a paper at me. Notice of suspension. Effective immediately, my family was banned from the pool for the rest of the summer. The violations: Ethan's late practice, Chloe's laugh, Ryan's floating lesson. I stared at the paper, then at her smug smile. "This is absurd," I said. "If you don't leave now," she smirked, "we'll consider it trespassing." The guard shifted uncomfortably, but he stood beside her. And just like that, our summer was over. The walk home felt like a funeral march. Chloe's head down, Ethan's fists shoved in his pockets, Ryan dragging his floaty in silence. Behind us, laughter rang out. I turned once and saw Victoria's friends parading through the pool gates with their coolers, floaties bobbing under their arms, the very toys my kids had been banned from using. That was the moment something inside me snapped. If Victoria wanted to play queen of the pool, so be it. But I wasn't about to let my kids' summer die under her rules. No. If she thought she had one, she had no idea who she was dealing with. That night I sat at my desk, the suspension notice in my hand. "Unsafe conduct," it read, as if my 12-year-old helping his little brother float was dangerous. No, this wasn't about safety, it was about power. And if the HOA thought they held all the power, I was about to prove them wrong. The night after that humiliating walk home, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind was. The suspension notice sat on my desk, its official letterhead mocking me in the dim glow of the desk lamp. "Unsafe conduct," it said. Ethan teaching Ryan how to float unsafe. Chloe's laugh unsafe. A 12-year-old finishing practice late unsafe. No, this wasn't about safety. This was about control, and Victoria Hale was enjoying every ounce of it. I reached for the thick HOA binder we'd received when we first moved into Maplewood Heights. Covenants, conditions, restrictions, page after page of vague legal language. I flipped through them with a builder's eye, the same way I studied blueprints. And there it was, buried in the fine print. The board had authority to make rules, but only if applied fairly and without discrimination. If this ever landed in court, Victoria wouldn't stand a chance. The problem was lawsuits take months, sometimes years. My kids didn't have years. They had this summer. So I needed something faster. The next morning, I hit the sidewalks again, clipboard in hand, knocking on doors, listening to stories. David Morales told me his daughter had been scolded for using a noodle during non-toy hours. Grace Lee shook her head as she described Victoria cutting her microphone mid-sentence at a meeting. Family after family, the same thing. Kids humiliated, parents powerless. By the end of the week, we had a coalition, 30 families this time. Bigger, stronger. And when the next HOA meeting rolled around, I wasn't just a father with a clipboard. I was a builder making a stand. I wore my work boots and hard hat deliberately. A reminder of who I was, someone who dealt with real things, concrete, steel, wood, not just binders and clipboards. I stood at the podium, petition in hand. "These signatures," I said, holding the papers high, "represent families who pay the same dues as everyone else. Families who deserve equal access to the amenities we maintain." My voice didn't shake. My words were steady, sharp. "These rules are unfair, selectively enforced, and in violation of the HOA's own bylaws. This isn't about order, it's about exclusion." I locked eyes with Victoria when I said it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. When the vote came, the room split down the middle. Parents tense and hopeful on one side. Retirees nodding along with Victoria on the other. Final tally 4-3, petition denied. As the meeting adjourned, Victoria intercepted me at the door. Her perfume sharp, her voice dripping with condescension. "You seem to have a lot of energy, Mr. Carter," she said. "Maybe channel it into something more productive than stirring up drama." I clenched my jaw but forced a smile. "Don't worry, Victoria, I've got plenty of ideas." She didn't know that even as she smirked and walked away, my mind was already building something bigger than a petition. That night, I pulled up the county's plat maps online. Old development plans, blueprints for Maplewood Heights buried in public records. Years in construction had trained my eyes to catch details. And there it was, a detail Victoria had missed. The far corner of my property wasn't technically under HOA jurisdiction. It was part of a grandfathered parcel from an older subdivision, zoned differently. I stared at the map, my pulse pounding. Could it be? Could Victoria's reach not extend as far as she thought? The next morning, I met Marcus, an old buddy who worked in the city planning department, at a diner. Over burnt coffee and greasy eggs, I slid the plat map across the table. "Tell me I'm not crazy," I said. Marcus studied it, then looked up with a grin. "You're not crazy. That corner's zoned residential recreational, predates the HOA's authority. You could put a court back there, a playground, even a pool. As long as you've got city permits, you're untouchable." I laughed too loud for the quiet diner. "You're telling me I could build a pool without hail breathing down my neck?" "Not just a pool," Marcus said, tapping the map. "Anything recreational, the HOA can't touch it." That was the moment the switch flipped. All the anger, all the humiliation, every dinner table silence. Suddenly, it had somewhere to go. If Victoria Hale thought she could bar my family from the community pool, fine. I'd build something better, not just for my kids, but for every family she'd trampled. I grabbed a napkin and started sketching. My pencil moved on instinct. A splash pad for the little ones, a modest slide curling into a catch pool, a waterfall feature, shaded benches for parents, safety fencing taller than code required. At the top of the napkin, I scrawled 2 words in bold letters: Project Splashback. It wasn't just about water, it was about reclaiming joy. That night, I called David and Grace, my voice steady, determined. "I'm not talking petitions anymore," I told them. "I'm building something Victoria can't control, and when it's done, every family here will have a place to swim." There was a pause, then David let out a low whistle. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," I said. Grace chuckled softly, but her tone was steel. "If you pull this off, Daniel, you won't just be building a water park. You'll be rebuilding this community." As I hung up the phone, I could already hear it in my mind, kids laughing, water splashing, parents relaxing without fear of clipboard fines. And across the street, Victoria Hale fuming in her lounge chair, powerless. For the first time all summer, I went to bed smiling. Because if Victoria thought she'd won, she was about to learn what happens when you push a builder too far. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The grass was still damp with dew, sticking to my boots as I paced out the far corner of my lot. The very corner Marcus had confirmed was free from Victoria's grip. Tape measure in hand, I walked the space like it was a job site. Slide here, splash pad there. Benches along the fence line, my mind spun with possibilities. For the first time since that suspension notice, I felt the weight lift. By breakfast, I told Laura. She raised her eyebrows, half skeptical, half amused. "Daniel, building a whole water park, that sounds expensive, and what if the HOA tries to stop you?" I slid the plat map across the table, my grin unshakable. "They can't. This section isn't under their jurisdiction. As long as I pull the permits, we're bulletproof." She studied the paper, then looked at me with a smile that said she knew I wouldn't back down. "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you." That afternoon, Marcus expedited the permit paperwork. "I've seen what that woman been pulling," he told me. "If anyone deserves a break, it's you." With permits in motion, I dusted off my old drafting table. Sheets of graph paper spread across the garage as my pencil carved out visions. A compact splash pad with water jets arching in playful fountains. A modest slide with a gentle curve. A waterfall feature doubling as background music. And a sturdy fence taller than code required. But I wasn't stopping there. Shade sails for the parents' benches. Solar panels to keep the water comfortably warm, even a small cabana for changing towels. "This isn't just a pool," I muttered to myself, staring at the sketches. "It's a statement." That evening, I gathered the kids in the living room and spread the drawings across the coffee table. Ethan leaned forward, wide-eyed. "Wait!" This is going to be in our backyard. Chloe clapped her hands. Can we invite our friends? Ryan bounced like a pogo stick. I want the slide. Dad, can I go first? Their excitement was fuel. The same children who had slumped in silence around our dinner table were suddenly glowing again. The very next day, I started making calls. Old contacts from construction, men who owed me favors, suppliers I'd helped out in the past. One by one, they came through. A pump supplier in Richmond offered me a discount. A concrete crew agreed to work overtime shifts. A landscaper buddy promised sod and plants once the build was done. Word spread quickly. In neighborhoods like ours, gossip travels faster than mail. By day 3 of site prep, mothers pushing strollers slowed to a crawl, peeking over my fence. "What's going on back there, Daniel?" one of them called out. I wiped sweat from my brow and smiled. "You'll see soon enough. Let's just say your kids might have a new favorite hangout." By day 5, the sound of jackhammers and backhoes echoed across Maplewood Heights. My kids sat in lawn chairs, sipping lemonade, cheering as if it were their personal halftime show. But not everyone was impressed. On the 3rd evening of construction, I looked up from my blueprints to see Victoria Hale marching down the sidewalk, 2 board members flanking her like soldiers. Clipboard in hand, her heels clicked against the pavement like gunshots. "This construction has not been approved by the Architectural Review Committee," she announced, her voice slicing through the evening air. I wiped my hands on my jeans and grinned. "Evening, Victoria. Funny thing about that, you don't have authority over this part of my property." I handed her the folder I'd prepared in advance, permits, plat maps, zoning documents. "All legal, all approved, out of your jurisdiction." Her face tightened as she flipped through the pages. Each turn of paper was like a punch to her pride. "This is clearly an attempt to circumvent HOA authority," she hissed. "You're welcome to call your lawyer," I said calmly. "Mine's already on standby, and just so you know, any attempt to interfere will be documented as harassment." For a moment, I thought she might explode right there on the sidewalk. Instead, she snapped the folder shut, spun on her heel, and stormed off. I watched her retreat, chuckling under my breath. For the first time, the Queen of Maplewood Heights had been knocked off her throne. The very next morning, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox, a cease and desist from the HOA's attorney. I didn't waste a second, handed it to my lawyer, Evan Marks. Within hours, he fired back. "My client's project is fully compliant with city zoning and permits. Any further interference will be documented as harassment." And just like that, the HOA went quiet. Construction roared on, concrete poured and cured, plumbing lines fitted and pressure tested, pumps installed, sleek and efficient, ready to recycle thousands of gallons. Fencing rose higher than code with lockable latches. By the 2nd week, the skeleton of Project Splashback stood tall, visible even from the street. Curious families lingered at the sidewalk, kids wide-eyed, parents whispering. Even the mailman slowed down, taking an extra minute to sneak a peek. And across the road, Victoria Hale, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching her kingdom crumble one cinder block at a time. That night, as work lights buzzed over the site, I sat in a lawn chair at the edge of the build. The smell of fresh cement hung in the air. I closed my eyes, and for the first time I could almost hear it, kids splashing, parents laughing, joy echoing across my backyard. And when I opened my eyes, I saw her, Victoria, standing stiffly at the far end of the sidewalk, glaring. I raised my glass of water in a mock toast. She turned on her heel and vanished into the dark. And I smiled. Because this wasn't just construction anymore. This was a rebellion. And it was only getting started. The first splash came on a hot Saturday morning in July. The paint on the fences was barely dry. The sod had just taken root. But when the pumps kicked on and the water jets arched high into the summer air, my backyard came alive. Ryan was the first one in. He squealed as the splash pad sprayed him from head to toe, his laughter echoing down the street. Chloe followed, diving under the waterfall, popping up with water streaming from her hair. Ethan raced up the slide ladder, heart pounding, before launching himself down into the pool below with a cannonball that sent water spraying 20 feet in every direction. Laura stood beside me, hand in mine, tears in her eyes. "You really did it," she whispered. And she was right. Project Splashback wasn't a sketch on a napkin anymore. It was real. A private water park right in our backyard, built with sweat, determination, and a little legal loophole Victoria Hale could never touch. By noon, the sound of kids laughing drifted across Maplewood Heights. Parents peeked over fences. Families slowed their cars to stare. Word spread faster than I ever imagined. By evening, my driveway was lined with strollers, bikes, and cars. Families who had once felt powerless under Victoria's rules were now standing in my backyard, their kids splashing freely, their shoulders lighter than I'd ever seen. David Morales clapped me on the back, shaking his head in disbelief. "Daniel, you've built the one place in this neighborhood where people can actually breathe." Grace Lee set down a tray of snacks on the picnic table. "This isn't just water," she said softly. "This is freedom." We didn't call it a water park, not officially, but the kids gave it a name anyway. They painted it in chalk on the sidewalk, big block letters dripping with color, Maple Splash Club. And just like that, Maplewood Heights had two pools, one controlled by Victoria's rules, the other powered by community. Of course, it didn't take long for the news to reach her. On the third day of Maple Splash Club, I spotted Victoria across the street, her arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes but not the tension in her jaw. Behind her, a small group of her loyalists gathered, whispering furiously, pointing at my fence. She didn't come over that day, not yet, but her silence was louder than any shouting. By the end of the week, the whispers became open conversations. Parents who had once avoided me were suddenly stopping by. They brought chips, coolers, folding chairs. The pool became more than a place to swim, it was a sanctuary. A space where laughter was louder than clipboards. But with each splash, each squeal of joy, I knew the storm clouds were gathering. Victoria struck at the next HOA meeting. The room was packed. Parents still damp from swimming at my place sat on one side. Her loyal retirees filled the other. The tension buzzed like a live wire. She stood at the front, binder open, voice sharp as she declared, "Mr. Carter's so-called water park is a nuisance. It undermines community cohesion, lowers property values, and violates the spirit of Maplewood Heights." I stood when she pointed her finger at me, my voice calm, deliberate. "Everything in my backyard is fully permitted and inspected. Every fence is up to code. Every pump meets safety standards. And as for property values," I paused, letting my words sink in. "Ask the families whose children are smiling for the first time in weeks if they think it's hurting the neighborhood." A murmur swept the room. Parents nodded. Even a few retirees shifted uncomfortably. But Victoria didn't back down. She raised her voice. "If we allow one man to do whatever he pleases, we invite chaos. This isn't about children. This is about order." The word hung in the air like a curse. Order, that was what she wanted. Silence, control. A neighborhood where joy required permission slips. I didn't shout, didn't curse. Just looked her in the eye and said, "Order without fairness isn't order, it's tyranny." The room went silent. For the first time, I saw cracks in her armor, a flicker of doubt. But she recovered quickly, gaveling the meeting closed before anyone else could speak. That night, as I locked the back gate, I caught her standing across the street again. Watching, not smiling, not smirking, just watching. Laura joined me on the porch, sliding her arm through mine. "She's not going to let this go," she said quietly. "I know," I answered. And I was right. Because if Maple Splash Club was a symbol of freedom for us, it was a symbol of defeat for her. And Victoria Hale, she wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Over the next few days, subtle signs appeared. Anonymous complaints filed with the city about excessive noise. Cars parked across from our house at odd hours, strangers scribbling notes. Flyers slipped into mailboxes claiming my pool was unsafe and illegally constructed. But each attempt failed. The city inspectors came, checked my permits, and left satisfied. Parents laughed off the flyers. Kids splashed louder than ever. Still, I could feel it. the tension coiling, the storm building. Because Victoria had lost control of the pool, and for a woman like her, control wasn't just a hobby, it was her crown. And now that crown was slipping. The night it finally broke, I was sitting on the porch with Laura. The cicadas buzzed, the water pumps hummed softly, and the smell of chlorine still lingered in the air. Across the street, Victoria stood again. Only this time she wasn't alone. 2 uniformed officers flanked her, their patrol car idling at the curb. Laura's hand tightened around mine. "Daniel, what is she doing?" I exhaled slowly, my eyes fixed on the woman who had banned my children, humiliated my family, and tried to strip this neighborhood of joy. "She's making her move," I said. And as the officers stepped onto my lawn, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with resolve. Because this wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about the soul of Maplewood Heights. The patrol car idled at the curb, its headlights cutting across my lawn. The hum of the water pumps in my backyard was drowned out by the low rumble of the engine. Victoria stood just behind the officers, arms folded, chin tilted high. Her smile wasn't smug this time. It was sharper, colder, like she already thought she'd won. "Mr. Carter," one of the officers said as he stepped forward. His partner hung back, resting a hand on his belt. "We've received a complaint about an unpermitted structure and unsafe conditions on this property." Laura's hand was still gripping mine, tight enough to leave marks. Chloe peeked from behind the screen door, her face pale. Ethan and Ryan were silent in the living room, pressed against the window like they were watching a scene they didn't understand. I kept my voice even. "Everything in that backyard is fully permitted, inspected, approved by the city. I have the paperwork if you'd like to see it." The officer nodded, professional but firm. "That would be best." I disappeared into the house, pulled the thick folder from my desk, every permit, inspection receipt, and plat map in perfect order. When I returned, I handed it to him without a word. He flipped through it slowly, his flashlight beam glancing across the pages. After a long pause, he closed the folder and handed it back. "Looks in order to me," he said. "We have no authority here if the city's cleared it." I caught the flash of red in Victoria's cheeks as she stepped forward. But the noise, the disruption. The officer cut her off, his tone neutral but firm. "Ma'am, that's a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you have a dispute, you'll need to take it up in court." For a moment, the silence was deafening. The hum of the pumps, the faint splash of water, the cicadas buzzing in the trees. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but the officers were already turning back to their car. She stood there, fists tight at her sides, watching her big move dissolve into nothing. Laura let out a shaky breath beside me. Chloe whispered, "Dad, are they going to take our pool away?" I knelt down, resting my hands on her shoulders. "No, sweetheart, they're not." Because this wasn't just a backyard pool anymore. It was proof that Victoria Hale didn't control everything. But deep down, I knew she wasn't finished. The next week, the war shifted from sidewalks to paperwork. Thick envelopes arrived daily, violation notices accusing me of everything from unauthorized gatherings to blocking traffic with parked cars. Each one more absurd than the last. I forwarded every single one to my lawyer, Evan Marks, and every time he sent back the same reply to the HOA, "Harassment, baseless, cease immediately." But Victoria wasn't trying to win in court. She was trying to wear me down, to bury me in fines, threats, and fear until I caved. And I'll admit, it almost worked. There were nights when I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at the stack of envelopes, my head in my hands. I'd built Project Splashback to bring joy, not to drag my family through a war. But then I'd hear it. The laughter. Even at midnight, echoes lingered in my backyard, the sound of families finally breathing easy. Ryan squealing as he came down the slide. Chloe shrieking under the waterfall. Ethan timing his cannonballs with precision. The neighborhood kids playing until the porch lights flicked on, parents finally smiling again. That sound reminded me why I couldn't back down. It wasn't about me, it was about them. So I dug deeper. I started documenting everything: dates, times, letters, photos. I recorded every whisper of intimidation, every anonymous flyer stuffed into mailboxes, every car parked outside my house for surveillance. One evening, as I was stacking another file of notes into the folder, Ethan asked quietly, "Dad, why is she doing this to us?" I looked at him, my 12-year-old son, his eyes older than they should have been. "Because some people mistake power for purpose," I said softly. "They think controlling others makes them strong, but it doesn't." He frowned. "Then what makes someone strong?" I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Knowing what you're fighting for and never letting go." That weekend, I hosted the biggest gathering yet. Families poured in, carrying coolers, food, even folding tables. It felt like a festival. Kids lined up for the slide. Parents stretched out under the shade sails, finally able to relax without worrying about fines or clipboards. I looked around, my heart swelling. For the first time in a long time, Maplewood Heights looked like a community again. But across the street, Victoria stood at her window, blinds pulled tight, her face a shadow behind the glass. And I knew. If laughter was victory for us, then silence was her weapon. She wouldn't storm my lawn again. She wouldn't risk another scene with police. No, she'd wait, plot, plan. And when she came back, it wouldn't be with flyers or fines. It would be something bigger. That night, as the last of the families left and the pumps finally clicked off, Laura touched my arm. "Daniel," she whispered, "she's not done, you know that, right?" I nodded, staring into the dark street where her house loomed like a fortress. "I know," I said. And deep down, I was already preparing. Because Victoria Hale had just lost the battle. But the war was far from over. The first envelope was thick, too thick to be another flyer or violation notice. When I slid it open at the kitchen table, the words leapt out at me like daggers. Notice of pending legal action. The HOA was suing me. The charges: creating a public nuisance, operating a commercial facility without authorization, devaluing property values. I read the words over and over, my pulse pounding in my ears. They weren't just trying to fine me anymore. They were trying to bankrupt me, to bury me under legal fees until I had no choice but to shut Maple Splash Club down. Laura sat across from me, silent, pale. Chloe hovered in the doorway, biting her lip. Ethan clenched his fists, muttering, "This isn't fair." Ryan didn't understand. He just asked, "Does this mean no more slide?" I swallowed hard. "No, buddy, not if I can help it." The next morning, I slid the envelope across Evan Mark's desk. He didn't look surprised. "Classic HOA move," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "They know they can't win on zoning or permits, so they're trying to drag you into endless litigation. It's a scare tactic. They'll hope the court costs break you before a judge even hears the case." I leaned back, jaw tight. "So what do we do?" He looked up, eyes sharp. "We fight, and we don't just fight back, we expose them." Within days, Evan filed a countersuit. Harassment, discrimination, selective enforcement. He compiled every violation notice, every anonymous flyer, every photo I'd taken of strange cars parked outside my house. "This isn't just about a pool anymore," Evan said. "This is about abuse of power." The neighborhood buzzed with tension. Some families whispered that maybe I should settle, keep the peace. But most, the ones whose children had been banned, scolded, humiliated, stood firmly behind me. David Morales came over one evening, his voice low but steady. "You're carrying all of us on your shoulders, Daniel. Don't let them break you. We've got your back." Grace Lee nodded, her eyes blazing. "If this goes to court, I'll testify. I'll tell them what she did to me, cutting my mic, silencing me. Enough is enough." It felt like a war council. Ordinary families turned soldiers, united against a common enemy. But Victoria wasn't backing down either. The smear campaign began quietly, whispers at HOA gatherings, letters slipped under doors claiming my water park was unsafe, unsanitary, illegal. Then it grew louder. Online posts appeared on neighborhood forums, unsigned but dripping with venom. "Would you trust your kids in a makeshift backyard pool?" Carter's reckless construction is an accident waiting to happen. It didn't matter that my permits were flawless, that inspectors had given me green lights across the board. She was waging a war of perception, and perception spreads faster than truth. One evening, Laura sat beside me on the porch, her voice trembling. "Daniel, what if this never ends? What if she drags us through court for years?" I took her hand, squeezed it. "Then we fight for years, but I'm not letting her win." Because by then, it wasn't just about us. It was about every parent who'd seen their child cry over a whistle or a rule that made no sense. It was about every kid who deserved laughter instead of silence. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't weigh on me. Nights got longer, sleep shorter. The laughter in my backyard sometimes felt distant, muffled by the pressure of what was coming. Then one afternoon, a knock came at my door. It wasn't a neighbor, it was Victoria. It was Harold Bennett, the former HOA president, the man who'd once called the pool the heartbeat of Maplewood Heights. "Daniel," he said with a tired smile, "mind if I sit?" We sat on the porch, the smell of chlorine drifting from the backyard. He looked out toward the sound of kids splashing and shook his head. That's what this place was meant to be, joy, community, not what she's turned it into." I frowned. "So why are you here?" His eyes met mine, steady. "Because you're not just fighting for your kids, you're fighting for what this neighborhood used to be. I may be retired, but I still have a voice, and I'm ready to use it." For the first time in weeks, hope flared again. The next HOA meeting was a battlefield. Parents packed the room, their children at their sides. Victoria sat at the head of the table, binder thicker than ever, lips pursed tight. When Harold stood to speak, the room hushed. "I was president here for 10 years, he said. "And I can tell you right now, Daniel Carter isn't breaking this community. He's saving it. The pool was never supposed to be a weapon. It was supposed to bring us together. And Maple Splash Club, that's what it's doing." The applause shook the walls. Parents cheered. Kids clapped. Even a few retirees shifted, embarrassed by their own silence. Victoria slammed her gavel, face red. "Order, order." But order was gone. The tide had shifted. And as I stood at the back of that room, watching neighbors who once cowered under her glare now standing tall, I realized something. This war was about to end. But not the way she thought. Because Victoria Hale had thrown everything she had at me. Fines, bans, police, lawsuits, smear campaigns. And still, here we were. Still standing, still laughing, still splashing. And in that moment, I knew. Her reign was crumbling. And all it would take was one final push to bring it crashing down. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors. My boots echoed against the tile as I walked in, file folder tucked under my arm. Laura squeezed my hand, her face pale but steady. Behind us, neighbors trickled in, David, Grace, even Harold, filling the benches with quiet determination. On the other side of the aisle, Victoria Hale sat stiff and immaculate, her silver bob gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her lawyer whispered furiously in her ear, flipping through a stack of binders thicker than my tool belt. But for the first time, her eyes didn't carry that smug certainty. There was something else there, something like fear. The judge took her seat. "This is Maplewood Heights HOA versus Daniel Carter," she began. "Both parties will be heard." The HOA's lawyer went first, painting me as reckless, irresponsible, running a public nuisance in my backyard. He spoke of noise, traffic, safety hazards. His words dripped with polished venom. But when it was Evan Mark's turn, he rose with quiet confidence. "Your Honor," he began, sliding exhibits onto the bench. "This case is not about noise. It is not about safety. It is about harassment. It is about an HOA president abusing her authority to selectively punish families with children." He produced the stack of violation notices. My client received fines for children laughing, for floating, for splashing, for activities clearly permitted under the bylaws. He handed up flyers, photos, copies of anonymous complaints. And when Mr. Carter refused to bend, when he exercised his legal right to build on his property, the HOA escalated into threats and intimidation. The judge's brow furrowed. And finally, Evan said, pulling out the trump card. Financial records obtained through discovery show that while Mrs. Hale banned children from toys and snacks at the community pool, she and her close associates repeatedly broke those same rules without consequence. Selective enforcement, abuse of power, harassment. The room buzzed. Parents exchanged looks. Even a few retirees muttered under their breath. Victoria's lawyer stammered, objecting, waving his arms, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Then, unexpectedly, Harold stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "I served as president of Maplewood Heights for 10 years. The pool was always meant as a community space, not a weapon. Daniel Carter has restored what Victoria Hale destroyed." The judge nodded, duly noted. When it was my turn, I rose. My voice wasn't polished like Evan. It wasn't legal language. It was just me, a father, a builder, a neighbor. "I didn't want this fight," I said quietly. "All I wanted was for my kids to swim, to laugh, to grow up the way kids should. But when that was taken from them, when they were humiliated and punished for no reason, I couldn't stay silent. Not as a father, not as a man. Maple Splash Club wasn't built to defy anyone. It was built to give back what we'd lost, joy. And if that's a crime," I paused, my throat tight, "then I'll take the punishment. But I'll never apologize for giving children a place to be children." The silence that followed was heavy, powerful. The judge leaned forward. "I've heard enough." Her verdict was swift. The lawsuit dismissed, my countersuit upheld. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for harassment and legal fees. And the final blow. Effective immediately, Victoria Hale was removed from her position as president. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the chamber. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. Then I heard it applause. My neighbors, my friends, my family, standing and clapping, their voices rising. David clapped me on the back. Grace wiped tears from her cheeks. Ethan grinned wider than I'd ever seen. Chloe and Ryan cheered, hugging Laura. And across the aisle, Victoria sat frozen, her binder closed, her crown shattered. She didn't look at me as she left the courtroom. She didn't look at anyone. But I watched her go, and I'll admit, I felt something close to pity. Because in the end, she had built her entire world on control, and when that control slipped, she had nothing left. Life in Maplewood Heights changed overnight. The board appointed interim members, parents and retirees alike, balanced voices instead of iron fists. The community pool reopened, laughter echoing again, but with one difference, it no longer felt like the only heartbeat of the neighborhood. Because Maple Splash Club was still standing. Every weekend, kids poured through my gates. Parents lounged under the shade sails. The sound of water splashing mingled with the smell of barbecue, the hum of conversation. It wasn't just a pool anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that no one, not even the most powerful, could strip away joy when a community stood together. One evening, as the sun set gold over Maplewood Heights, Ethan turned to me, towel around his shoulders. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." "You think Mrs. Hale will ever come back?" I looked across the street, where her once pristine house now sat quiet, blinds drawn, a for sale sign staked in the yard. "No," I said softly. "I think her chapter over." Chloe splashed Ryan under the waterfall, their laughter ringing out. Laura leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. And I thought about everything we'd been through, the humiliation, the silence, the fear, the fight. And I realized something. Sometimes victory doesn't look like winning a battle. Sometimes it looks like kids laughing freely, parents breathing easy, neighbors finally standing side by side. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is joy. Because in the end, Maple Splash Club wasn't built out of anger. It was built out of love. And that was something no HOA president could ever take away. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.